I am not stopping this until I'm done. I'm not. I am not. I don't care if there's a construction outside. I am not stopping this until I'm done. Hey guys, welcome back. Today I actually have a new microphone. The microphone that I used in the last video was a little weird. It's a microphone I got with the camera a few years ago, and I guess time did its thing and it's just stopped working correctly. I'm hoping this microphone does its job. Hopefully the audio is a little better. Sorry to those of you that had to suffer through that. I heard it and I was like, oh no, I had to change the microphone. Feels a little more legit now. It's kind of weird, but it's fun. Anyways, welcome back to all of you. My name is Lissy Marlin, to those of you that do not know me. I'm a New York Times bestselling illustrator. I have been a freelance illustrator for about 10 years. I've delved into toys, I've delved into mobile apps, I've done picture books, middle grade novels, etc. And now I am illustrating my own original graphic novel, which is going to come in a few years. Unfortunately, that's how publishing works. I have to work slowly and it will come out in perhaps 4 years, but please look forward to that. In the meantime, I actually wanted to take my time today and talk about something that I feel is perhaps very boring, and it is the concept of scheduling. Scheduling, especially when you're a freelance artist, and how routines and self-care systems work in your favor. So I think talking about this is actually something very important and it's something very near and dear to my heart. And the reason why I feel so passionate about teaching about scheduling, especially if you're a freelance artist, is because I spent 15 years of my life struggling, coming in and out of burnout. Sorry, I'm reading notes because, again, I have ADHD and there is no way I'm going to be able to memorize everything I want to say. So if you see me looking to the other side, it's because I have a different monitor. I can show you a little bit of my setup. I have my coffee mug, my tour box, and 3 monitors. Anyways, the reason I feel so passionate about teaching about scheduling, especially if you're a freelance artist, is because I spent 15 years of my life coming in and out of burnout and missing deadlines without realizing what was going on. I have also been to art school. I took that route that everybody told me to take, and I have taken countless online classes about character design, about portfolio design, about visual development art, about composition, about color and light, but somehow none of them ever touches on a topic that is so basic as the concept of scheduling. I also never really heard of any type of accommodations or any sort of systems that could work for people like me, where part of my brain really wants structure, but the other part just thrives in chaos. So I never actually saw anybody else ever talk about something so basic, but so important to everyday life. So I feel very passionate about touching on topics like this because I want to start these kind of conversations. I want to see if somebody else can relate to the things that I've gone through and see how I can help them. This is precisely why I decided to teach it myself in my last class, Create Your Own Magic, and why I have made available specifically this lesson plan on my website. I took a part of that class and packaged it differently in order to only use that section of the lesson plan. So if you guys want to check it out, please go ahead. And definitely keep in mind that this is a lesson that was pre-recorded from a couple months ago. This was done in the spring. So if you hear me talking to an audience, that's what's happening. I am speaking to somebody else, to a class that has moved on to different things. Hopefully it's helpful to you guys if you do listen to it. Actually, I wanted to add on a different layer to this conversation and actually talk about how my ADHD diagnosis changed the way I work freelance every day. For those of you that have been following me for a while, you already know I was diagnosed with ADHD in the middle of the pandemic, very much like half the population that used TikTok, apparently. It was something that sincerely changed the course of my life. I mean, first of all, it's amazing to have that diagnosis because, honestly speaking, you finally say, wow, there's nothing wrong with me. You know, I just been working in a system that just doesn't work for the way my brain works. And that actually takes so much guilt and so much pressure off me. But the other part is that now that I know the way my brain works, then I can adjust and apply different systems in order to be more successful every day as a freelance artist. Honestly, the ADHD diagnosis came as a surprise to myself. I never expected that. I was of the idea that I was not hyperactive. Turns out all of the hyperactivity was inside of me. Turns out you can have hyperactivity inside and outward. And I was shocked. Anyways, before talking about solutions, I actually want to talk about the problems that I personally encountered that led me to seek out an ADHD diagnosis, just in case somebody else is struggling in the same way, and perhaps this can lead them into a different path or a path that could help them along the way. First things first, I had to recognize the problem. I had no structure. I had a lack of structure. I didn't know this back then, but realizing I had absolutely no structure in form of a routine or a system every day in my life, while working from home, was the very first thing that led me to burnout many times. Freelance life is unpredictable. If you have been a freelance artist, you know this. You have no idea when the next paycheck is gonna come. I have experienced many times where payment for a project would get delayed in such a way that I would spend 2 or 3 months without seeing any sort of payment from any client. And it's not just, it's not the client's fault sometimes. For instance, when the pandemic hit, all of the deadlines were pushed and everything was pushed away, and I was not prepared for, what would happen in the coming month. And that meant I was, 1, living out of savings, and 2, I actually had a couple months where I couldn't even pay my credit card. So the reason why having routines or a structure every day as a freelance artist is because when you have a career that is so unpredictable, you need a constant in your life to keep you grounded. If you start the workday some days in the mornings, other days in the afternoon, other days in the middle of the night, then it creates a completely unstable cycle of work that totally messes up your rhythm of doing things. It creates more instability and more chances of burning out, because instability brings more anxiety, brings more stress, and even more toxic habits. Which brings me to point number 2. Having no structure made me prone to acquire anxiety-driven habits. Like I mentioned, lack of structure brings anxiety. I am already an anxious person. Ever since the pandemic started, I have not known a moment of peace. And that already has nothing to do with the lack of structure in my everyday life. Imagine jumping into a lifestyle that is specifically designed to be totally unstable and unpredictable when you are already so anxious. In my case, this presented as constant snacking to keep myself awake, to avoid excessive sleeping or brain fog. Sometimes I would just get bored and I would just snack. That actually developed into an eating disorder, which turns out to be a side effect of ADHD, but we can talk about that a little later. These also presented in anxious spending. Sometimes I would just simply buy something because I want some retail therapy. My lack of structure drove me to have completely lack of sleeping patterns. So I would be wide awake in the middle of the night, and of course I could watch a movie in the middle of the night and it would be nothing. It would be like nothing. Everything is always connected one way or another, and this is exactly what brings me to point number 3: lack of support systems. Lack of structure and anxiety driven habits meant I had no support systems. This meant that I didn't know what to do in order to avoid procrastination, resulting in my schedule getting so backed up that I had to pull all-nighters all the time, or even rush at the last minute to make a deadline. This also meant I was constantly missing deadlines and constantly making up for delays at every point, every time, and that was detrimental to my mental health and the health of relationship between me and my clients. Lack of support systems also meant that I was actively not working in replenishing my energy, my creativity, or taking the necessary breaks in order to keep the demands of creativity. Being creative demands a lot of energy, both physical and mental. And if you do not have systems that are specifically designed to make sure that you check in with yourself, whether it's self-care, naps, etc., then you will inevitably burn out. And like I said, everything is connected, which then brings me to my next point. Lack of support systems meant I had no idea what I needed in the first place. I had a complete lack of understanding of what I needed. Routines are not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. They're actually designed with the needs of the individual in mind. So that's actually why it doesn't matter how many artists or influencers suggest X or Y routines, chances are they won't work for you, and that is actually okay, and that is meant to happen. For instance, I always have suggestions of, oh, maybe work out in the mornings, maybe meditate in the mornings, maybe do X and Y. There's construction on the other side of the house. I am excited. Just because something works for me, it doesn't mean that it has to work for somebody else. It doesn't mean that it has to be the standard. I didn't know that. That was mind-blowing. This was so important for me to understand because I thought I was a failure because I couldn't exercise first thing in the morning, or because I couldn't do yoga in the morning or couldn't meditate. I thought I was the problem. So my black and white mentality will actually lend me to spiral out of control. This also applies to nutrition. I didn't know that either. Understanding what you need, what you specifically need of your routines, means that you can customize them to fit the specific way in which your brain works. Which then brings me to my next point: lack of understanding of my own creative process. If you're an artist, chances are you already know about the creative process, but do you really? But do you really? This is something else I feel very passionate to talk about because even though it is so simple, not many people take it seriously. So obviously, not knowing what I needed out of my routines meant I had no understanding of what I needed out of my own creative process. You see, the creative process is something we all know and seem to understand as creatives, but the specific stages of the creative process and how each step works for me was never taught to me. I didn't even know this was something I needed to learn. I didn't know I needed to do research every time I would get started on a project. I didn't know I needed to take breaks in order for my brain to assimilate the research I did. I didn't know slowing down was necessary for me to process ideas. I didn't even know which elements in my environment were even necessary to have inspiration. For example, sunny mornings are my preferred times to be creative, which meant that if I overslept and somehow I started my work in the afternoon due to lack of routines, that meant that my entire productivity window would just be gone. It would be completely wasted if I started work in the afternoons. Honestly, understanding my own creative process was specifically the thing that changed my life as a creator. Because before this change, I thought I hated sketching. I have to tell you this right now. A few years ago, I used to tell my best friend, "Oh my God, I hate sketching. It feels like eating my vegetables." I didn't understand why. I would always struggle with the sketching phases, but then I would have tremendous amounts of fun when it was coloring time. This was so harmful. The conceptual phase of a project is the most important part. It is the foundation you create, and it is what ensures you have a successful concept at the end of the project every time. Because sketching is the most important part of your creative process. Sketching and color comp, because if you do not do either, that means that you're going to spend more time second guessing yourself in the final stages when you go into final. You are not going to believe this, but this is now my favorite part, my favorite stage of my process. In my case, it was a sensory issue. If I needed to sketch something, it needed to feel like it was traditional. So if I were to sketch digital, I would need a very texture brush, and I would need to start with something that would be kind of like a mid-tone or something that would just give a different tone to the page. And if I feel very stuck, then I would actually sketch by hand with an actual sketchbook. So for me, it's actually sensory, and I didn't know that. I don't even understand how I never made that connection before. I honestly cannot get enough of sketching, and honestly, I'm not even worrying about colors anymore. No joke. So now that I have actually talked to you about the top 5 things, I mean, there are more, but these are the top 5 things that I actually struggled with when I was starting as a freelance illustrator. Now I want to talk about the help I got, because it is very important to share a little bit more of that process just in case it helps somebody else. Of course, due to the lack of insurance support in the United States, this help was actually temporary because all of the investments I made were completely out of pocket. Unfortunately, the United States do not cover mental health in the way it should. So definitely keep this in mind if you choose to do this yourself. During the 6 months, I was able to have help for myself. I was able to learn so much about myself and what I needed in order to function every day, which in turn helped me implement some very important scheduling systems and self-care systems to my daily life as a freelance artist working from home. These include, first of all, therapy and adjustment of medication. At first, I joined therapy because I was burnt out and I was terribly depressed. I was coming out of a very difficult job and I didn't want to draw anymore, and I didn't like where I was mentally, so I joined therapy in a weekly basis. Weekly, sometimes bi-weekly basis. It actually completely helped with stability over the years, but after understanding the root of the problem, which is, the ADHD diagnosis, my therapy and my medication needed to be adjusted, because turns out I wasn't depressed, I was just understimulated. It is very interesting when you learn you have ADHD and you understand what understimulation feels like. It feels very similar to depression, because you don't feel like you want to do anything. You're bored, you're sluggish, you don't have any drive, any inspiration, nothing. You have brain fog, you just want to be in your bed all the time. Turns out that was understimulation for me, but the problem is that if you have understimulation for too long, you spiral because you see yourself not meeting your goal. Of course, this leads to depression because you cannot function. The reason therapy needed to be adjusted to fit my needs after the ADHD diagnosis is because even though therapy is usually about releasing traumas and doing a lot of inner work, therapy now has become the process in which now I tackle the narrative that I used to have, where I say there's something wrong with me. With ADHD, you have emotional dysregulation, and 2, you have no idea what you feel. You are completely blind to your emotions. And now I am much more productive because working on your own emotional dysregulation and identifying emotions helps you with your downward spirals. On the other hand, medication actually helped increase focus. When I switched from antidepressants to ADHD medication, which in this case is Vyvanse, this actually helped increase my focus every day, which meant I was finally able to function correctly. And this would immediately decrease my anxiety and my depression because I could finally meet my goals every day. The next thing I got was an ADHD coach. So I didn't know ADHD coaches were a thing until I realized that there were limits to therapy. Therapy will help you with your emotions and your inner thoughts, but an ADHD coach will actually be the person that will work with you through every single decision paralysis or executive dysfunction episode and help you understand why you are stuck and how to get out of there. This helped me understand the differences between understimulation, executive dysfunction, decision paralysis, depression, anxiety, and how I react to each one of them every time. This actually helped me big time when implementing different support systems for myself as well. For instance, I would often struggle to brush my teeth when I take a shower at night. So through working with a coach, we figured out that going into the bathroom, changing your clothes, brushing your teeth, taking a shower, then skincare, etc. was too many steps. And in order to facilitate this for me, what we did was put the toothbrush in the shower. So now every time I take a shower, I brush my teeth. That actually simplified everything for me in a way that I cannot believe it was that easy, and now I don't struggle as much. That's what I mean when I'm saying implementing systems that work specifically for you. Finally, another thing I did was find books to read and find a community to relate to. Reading and learning about your struggles is so important, but having a community to relate to is perhaps the most important thing. Thanks to apps like TikTok, I was able to identify my struggles by seeing them in somebody else. I was no longer alone in the struggle, and I was able to understand the most important part. There is nothing wrong with me. There is nothing wrong with me. There is nothing wrong with you. I've just been living in a life based on systems that were not designed for my specific needs. So with this in mind, let's actually talk about the changes I made. Okay, so as you can probably tell by everything I've talked about, when I started as a freelance artist, my life was pretty chaotic. I didn't have any sort of structure at all. And I would always either, tackle deadlines at the last minute. I would have all-nighters all the time. I would collapse because I would have such poor nutrition. It was crazy. It was sincerely nuts. I had to rewire my brain and really redesign my entire day from beginning to end because the way I was living was completely unsustainable. So first, let's talk about changes I made to my daily life. The first one is implementing morning routines. The reason these are important is because when you're a freelance artist, or specifically when working from home, it is very easy to blur out the line between life and work. Morning routines are important because you need to slow down in the mornings. The reason for this is because you have to look out for your body. You have to have breakfast. You have to brush your teeth. You have to do these routines every day in order to look after yourself. When I started as a freelance artist, I would wake up and immediately jump to my computer. I would have no morning routine whatsoever, and that was so harmful because I was ignoring my most basic physical needs. So a morning routine is specifically designed for myself to slow down in the morning and to actually not think about work first thing in the morning. Literally, the moment my alarm rings in the morning, the very first thing I do is either take my phone and play Genshin Impact, or take my Switch and play Animal Crossing or Legend of Zelda. It doesn't matter. It has to be a game that is long and wholesome. When I was teaching, this was the most controversial thing that I said. For some reason, I never considered that it would be something weird, but the reason for this is because when you have ADHD, it is very, very hard to wake up. It's very hard to wake up in the mornings. And that is specifically why it was so hard for me to meditate in the mornings. It was so hard for me to go to the gym. It's not that I couldn't. It's not that I was lazy. It's just that I physically couldn't. So this is one of the systems that I've implemented for myself in order to set the mood of the day where I am taking everything slow and I'm having fun from the beginning without actually thinking about work, is play a video game. Then I would go have coffee. I would change my clothes. I would actually do my self-care routines, you know, brushing my teeth, skincare, brushing my hair, etc. And then I would start another routine, which is my start to workday routine. Similar to a morning routine, the reason a start to workday routine is so important is because the line between life and work is so blurred when you're working from home that you need a ritual for your brain to say, oh, okay, we are in work mode now. So in order for me to switch to work mode, then I would sit on my desk, look at my schedule, look at my to-do list. I made something for myself, which is a to-do list where I have everything laid down through the week. It's also attached in the class that I made, that I keep mentioning, just in case you're interested. In any case, I check my to-do list for the week or for the day. I check off the calendar for the week. Sorry, for the day. I check off the day. I look at the task. I look at my emails, and that immediately symbolizes the beginning of the workday. Another routine I implemented is a lunch routine. I didn't know I needed one. I didn't know that. In my case, I would always either eat on my desk or eat watching a show or not have lunch at all. And now it is important for me to have at least an hour without work for lunch. Sometimes I take 2 hours. One of the systems for self-care, which I'm going to talk later on, that I have implemented for myself is actually a 2-hour lunch break in the middle of some days in order for me to take a nap in the middle of the day. Because again, being an artist is very difficult. Now that I have ADHD, now I understand that I am constantly working against myself and against my brain. Of course, I'm going to be exhausted at some point. So in order for me to recharge, I have to take things slow. So of course, I have a 1 hour to 2 hour lunch break sometimes. Another routine I implemented is the end of workday routine. Similar to your beginning of workday, you have to tell your brain, this is the end of the workday for me. I have to move on. I have to turn off everything. When you have ADHD, it's hard to switch from task to task. So for me, if I do not have a routine at the end of the day, then that means that I will continuously think about work, even if I am not working. So I will have this anxious pattern of behavior where I would just not be able to relax at all. Not sleeping until very late at night, wake up every single hour of the night, always thinking, is it time to work again? Is it time to work again? And I will never actually get a restful sleep, which then brings me to a wind down routine immediately after. And the reason I have these two sort of back to back is because I need to dedicate some time away from my computer on purpose. I have to force myself to get out of this environment. So what I would do is actually immediately after I have my end of workday routine, which essentially is just collecting all of the mugs that I have collected and, you know, turning off my computer, putting everything away, checking the to-do list for tomorrow. I always do the to-do list for tomorrow the day before because I will never remember. So I do all of that and immediately I just turn on a candle, clean my environment, and go downstairs or outside, play with the pets, do something to stay away from this environment for about an hour minimum. And if you live with me, you will find me in the communal areas just sitting, and maybe I am switching through TikTok, or I am playing with the pets, or I'm just outside, but I have to dedicate at least 30 minutes to an hour outside of this environment in order for my brain to understand, okay, we are not working anymore, it's time to relax. The next thing I did was actually implement a nighttime routine. The reason for this is very much like waking up in the morning and just jumping to work immediately. The same would happen to me. I would come from my computer, go to bed, and just forget about everything else. And that is so harmful. So what I would have to do is start my night routine around 9:30. You know, I would brush my teeth, I would take a shower, I would unwind, I would try not to have phone like screens or phones on until a specific time. So starting at 10 at night, for instance, all of my devices will go to sleep or in quiet mode. That means that nobody will be able to reach me past a certain hour, and that means less distractions, less screen, and perhaps even I would have the chance to maybe not watch movies or TikToks before bed, and I could just read a graphic novel or a book. And this actually is pretty much my day-to-day. And honestly, sometimes I cannot do it all. Sometimes I cannot make it work because, like I mentioned, when you have ADHD, you're constantly working against your brain because you thrive in chaos. And the trick to everything is understanding that just because you cannot do it today doesn't mean that you cannot try again tomorrow. And the trick to everything is to try it enough time that it becomes second nature to you and you don't even have to think about it again. There is another change I made that I actually never thought I needed, but it was so important, which is a weekend system. I always thought I was someone spontaneous. Turns out I am not spontaneous. I am just a very impulsive person. I cannot do spontaneous at all. So what would happen is if I went into a weekend without scheduling plans ahead, without actually making a structure for myself ahead of time, then I would actually get bored. I would have decision paralysis, because that meant as soon as the weekend hit, I was immediately tackled with the possibilities of what the weekend could be. And because I had so many options, I would freeze. I would let the restlessness and the boredom take over, and I would do none of the things I want to do. Another thing that I did on weekends was create reset days, which is Sundays. Sundays are my reset days where I clean my room, clean everything. Sometimes I would do skincare routines. I would completely reset everything. It would just be a day where everything is dedicated to getting ready for a new week. Those were the changes that I made to my daily life. But now let's talk about changes I made to my work day or to my work life. The first important one I made is to actually categorize days. Like I mentioned before, with ADHD, it's actually very hard to change tasks. And that means that if in the morning I am very into a project, it is very hard for me to switch to another one. Or it is very hard for me to think about administration for my business, or it is very hard for me to do revisions. So I would actually categorize every single day of the week. Mondays would be admin Mondays, where I would reset the week. I would look at my to-do list for the week. I would answer emails. I would sign contracts. I would read contracts. I would read manuscripts. I would do revisions. The reason I chose Mondays for that is because Mondays are actually the day of the week where I have the most energy, because it's immediately after my reset days. I have the most energy and the most motivation, and because of this, I have chosen to tackle the hardest tasks on Mondays. I also have, for instance, low energy Wednesdays, where I actually have very, very low energy, and what I use for those days is, schedule appointments, schedule meetings, schedule, very low energy tasks like research, do errands on Wednesdays, for instance. And that actually also works for me because it's sort of like a scale. I have to essentially work with the way my energy levels sort of fluctuate through the days of the week. So if Monday starts really high, that means that it goes down on Wednesday. And then because I allow myself to take it slow on Wednesday, that means that I get another spike of energy on Thursdays and then Fridays, etc. Speaking of Fridays, I actually have a completely unscheduled day on Fridays. Days where I am either learning, I am teaching, perhaps I'm not doing any work at all, or a day where I just take it to do personal work. Fridays for me are the most important days because they are the days where I am able to recharge in a creative level, because I allow myself to just have fun and just go with the flow and allow my brain to just seek the serotonin it needs. The next change I did was actually learn to delegate tasks. this was very hard for me. First, I didn't know this was even a possibility, but it is one that is so important. When I was able to understand how my personal creative process works, I was able to break down every step of my creative process and understand which parts of the creative process are the parts where I struggle the most. So for instance, I struggle with contracts and negotiating rates and, going back and forth with the client. So because of that, I try to involve my agent as much as possible. This is the reason why I vow to never be without an agent, because they are the ones that sort of save my life when it comes to the things that I really struggle with. Another task that I actually learned to delegate was actually getting help when I am working in a very, very long project, very much like a middle grade book. You see, books take months to complete. And because of the way my brain works, something that takes so long runs the risk of becoming monotonous. Monotonous? Monotonous. Monotonous. Boring. Good enough. This is one of the things I would struggle the most, and one of the things that I would actually procrastinate the most. So when I would have 30 to 50 illustrations to do for a middle grade book, the part of that process that I actually found the most boring was actually blocking shapes. I first ink the piece, then I would block the piece, and then I would shade it. I would change the values, and I would make everything look, good. And the process I hated the most was actually blocking shapes. So now because of this, I am able to allocate a small percentage of the money that is paid to me by the client and actually give it to a creative assistant or someone that can actually block those shapes for me. That means that while somebody else is doing the most boring things, then I can come back and do my magic. And you know what? I thought that was something to be ashamed about, but honestly, it's not. I am working around my own struggles, and it is so important to give yourself a break. And that has been the most important thing for me, because now I am able to meet deadlines. I don't always succeed, but in the little chances that I do, that's what helps me. Another change that I've made to my work life is to create deadline cushions. If I feel like it's going to be very hard for me to meet this deadline, then what I would do is try to schedule it for myself a week earlier. That way I could try to do it sooner, because for me, when I have ADHD, the deadline is the thing that gives me the biggest motivation. So I would try to schedule a deadline for myself sooner than I expected in order for me to actually meet the deadline when I have to, especially if it's very important. Another thing I did is actually identifying problems early. And this actually comes from understanding your own creative process and learning to break down your own creative process in order to schedule yourself and quote clients. And that's actually something I also touched about on my previous lessons. And it's actually very important, because your creative process is the thing that informs the most out of yourself. How to price yourself, how your hourly rate works, etc. So if you haven't figured out what your creative process is, I really, really, really encourage you to do that. But going back to the topic at hand, one of what I think is a superpower of ADHD is hyperfocusing, which means that I tend to tackle a project and really dive in and be completely just immersed in that task until it's done. The problem with that is that hyperfocusing actually can burn you out. It is completely unpredictable, and sometimes you cannot even stop it. For instance, if I have a client that gives me a character design project, and the character design project is a project that I actually really enjoy, it could be a mermaid, it could be something awesome and beautiful and something super colorful, I know very well I will hyper-focus on that project above every other project I may have. So it is very good to identify these problems early in order to, one, schedule around them, and two, implement systems for yourself in order to recharge. Because like I said, hyper-focusing sometimes cannot be stopped, and sometimes it's just sitting in your computer without moving, without eating, without drinking anything for 12 hours because you're having so much fun and you cannot really stop it. So you have to constantly find ways to replenish your energy. If I hyper focus that way, that means that the next day I would have it free, or I would work half day, or I would work on a very, very slow task. Wouldn't actually spend that much energy, and that's what I mean. Another big change I made was working 4 days a week. I actually implemented the 4-day week for myself a couple years ago, and it's actually the best thing I did for myself. Like I mentioned before, the 5th day is actually casual Fridays, where I actually do not have anything scheduled for myself, and I choose to decide what I want that Friday to be. I could be working on client work for Monday, or I could simply be doing personal work. I could be having fun. I could be doing fan art. I could read graphic novels. I could film. Honestly, it's been pretty great. Let's talk about changes I've made to the way in which I approach illustrations now. One of the most important things I've done for myself is actually understanding the way I personally work and learning to identify the difference between the feeling of each task. I actually created for myself a sheet where I would break down every single project into different steps depending on how I work. And every single of those tasks, then I categorize it. I give it a 3-star rating system where I would identify which of these tasks is the most fun, which would take me the most time, or the hardest, or which one is going to be the biggest struggle. So if I see a task that is going to be a complete struggle, but it is very important in the hierarchy, that means that I would actually schedule it on Mondays or on days where I actually have big energy, where I have actually a lot of energy to give. I would not schedule tasks like that during days of the week where I am actually sluggish and low on energy, like Wednesdays or Fridays. Another big change I made to the way I approach illustration is actually dividing illustration projects in bite-sized pieces. And what I mean by that is that before I had any kind of structure to my life, I would start an illustration and finish it on the same day. And that is actually horrible. Very much how hyperfixation works. When I start an illustration and finish it on the same day, one, I am prone to burn out halfway. And by the end of it all, I would start cutting corners, I would get lazy, and I would actually not perform the best of my abilities. That means that if I finish that illustration at the end of the day on the same day, tomorrow when I look at that illustration again, I can see all of the flaws, everything I could have done different. And that's actually worse. That feels so much worse. So what I do is I actually divide each step. I would sketch on Monday. I would dedicate 2 hours or 3 hours a day to illustrating a single piece, especially if it's important like a book cover. And I would continue working on intervals of 2 hours or 3 hours at a time on the same piece until it's done. And that actually maximizes the chances of having an actual beautiful piece that I'm actually proud of. It takes away chances of burning out in the middle of the illustration. And 3, it actually helps because I can return to the piece once again every day with a clear head and with fresh eyes, and I can see, oh, I missed this yesterday, maybe I can improve upon it now. So it is actually so important to learn to take your time. I think that's at the core of every single system and routine that I've created for myself, because I tend to just work 100 miles an hour without stopping all the time, and that is so harmful and absolutely will lead me to burnout. Another change I have made is scheduling projects in the calendar based on the steps of my personal creative process. So like I said, I break down every single project into steps depending on my own personal creative process. But I also do another thing. Every single step I break down becomes a separate time slot that I would schedule in the calendar depending on how much time I need, and just continue scheduling everything that way. And finally, I will not tackle very large projects again without any support. Sometimes, like I mentioned, it can be a creative assistant that can help me with the very, very basic tasks when it comes to finishing individual illustrations for a book. But sometimes that also means weekly check-in with a friend to say, hey, this is the progress I've made this week. Weekly or daily check-ins or some sort of checking with maybe my agent, because I need to find ways to remain accountable every time. There's something called time blindness, where the concept of time doesn't actually exist in my brain. And sometimes I could even go without talking to a friend for months on end, and none of that time from having no interaction will even matter in my brain. I would see this person and it is as if I've never left their side. And the same can happen with deadlines. The same can happen with work. So I have to make sure to have multiple check-ins and multiple systems where I check in with myself and make sure that I am on task, because unfortunately it's just how my brain works, and I have to find ways that work for me. Finally, I want to talk about the changes I made to the way I approach self-care. I have given little bits and pieces about the way I tackle routines to better fit my needs, like playing video games in the morning. And that is essentially self-care. It is so important to understand that I am not a spontaneous person. So now that I know that, I have to always look out for myself, for my future self, because my future self has no idea what the frick she's doing. She has no idea. She has time blindness. She has hyper-focusing issues, and I have to constantly look forward to any roadblock that she may encounter every single day and every single day in the future. So I have to make sure whatever self-care routine I have is changed in order to help me and not push me back. So if I have to work out, I have to also work out with a buddy or with a trainer, because I cannot do it by myself. If I have to eat healthy, then I have to also do it with someone alongside me. And maybe I have to check in every single month with a nutritionist or something of the like. It is so important to understand that routines need to work for you and your specific needs. And it is not shameful if you cannot do what somebody else can do. So with that said, the next implementation has been abandoning the guilt that comes from having no follow through. If I cannot exercise today like I promised, it is okay. I need to understand, or I need everybody listening to understand, that just because you were not able to do something today, it doesn't mean that you cannot try again tomorrow. One of my favorite quotes come from Monkey D. Luffy, and I say that all the time. He said, as long as I am alive, I have unlimited chances. I have unlimited opportunities. So if today I do not do any of my self-care routines, none of my morning or night routines, and I just live my life in chaos, that doesn't mean I cannot try again. It also means that I'm not a failure. It just means that's just the way I am, and that is okay. There's nothing wrong with me. And once I am done going through that cycle where I am unable to meet deadlines or do routines, etc., then comes the part of the self-care process where I have to hold my hand and walk myself back into the systems that I've created for myself. You know, slowly, everything that I've made for myself, for routines, etc., is specifically designed for myself to slow down. That is the most important key for myself, to force myself to take things slow, because as soon as I hit the hyperfocus session of ADHD, I know for sure I will not be able to function the same way for a while, because I will be 100% burnt out. Another large change I made for myself that took a while to get together was actually prioritizing my needs over deadlines. And unfortunately, sometimes that means I do miss deadlines on purpose. And that is something perhaps I shouldn't be admitting on video and broadcasting to the world, but it is actually very true. If, for instance, if I get COVID, which happened this year, and I have a whole bunch of deadlines, I would very much cancel all projects if I can financially, of course. I will cancel deadlines, I will cancel projects, I will move things around because there's no way I'm going to not prioritize my health. If I work when I am not in the mental state to get anything done, if I force myself to get things done, it will never be done to my satisfaction, and I will actually spiral. All of the systems that I've made for myself is creating an eternal backup plan system. So if on a day I cannot function, I always have a backup plan behind me. That is what I mean when you have to implement self-care tactics and systems for yourself in order to constantly recharge yourself. Being an illustrator takes so much out of you. And not only that, when you are an illustrator, you are a business owner, whether you know that or not. And being a business owner has so much to do with business, so it has so much to do with taxes. You have so much to worry about, and you have to look out for yourself at every step of the way. So if one day you get burnt out, you have to have systems in place to take it easy, recharge, and tackle things again. And last but not least, I schedule breaks between big projects. Sometimes that means a large weekend where I just don't do anything. Sometimes that means scheduling a month break. It depends on the complexity and how taxing the project was, but I have to make sure to always have a break between large chunks of time where I am spending a lot of time and a lot of effort. So if I have a book project that takes 3 months, and those 3 months I spent it just working crazy amounts of time and spending a lot of energy, that means that I would take at least a week break right after. And that means that every project that comes after has to also obey that law. I will not schedule any other project right after a big project that way because I have to recharge. Perhaps I'm talking from a very privileged position. Not everybody is able to take these breaks, and I think I am able to do this thanks to the amount of experience I have. Now that I have over 10 years of experience as a freelance artist, all of the clients and all of the projects that come my way come organically. That means that I don't actually have to go out of my way to get new clients, new projects, etc. And that is actually something I am able to do right now. I just want you to understand that just because you cannot do it right now doesn't mean that you cannot in the future. I understand that right now I am speaking from a very privileged position that not everybody necessarily enjoys. However, that said, it is very important to understand that you do need to take a break every once in a while, and even if it's just taking a long weekend, could be enough. So definitely 100% take that in mind for yourself if you're able. And that's it. This concludes everything I sort of can think of at the top of my mind when it comes to how I have sort of changed since I got my ADHD diagnosis. And like I mentioned a couple times, if you want to learn a more in-depth look behind the concept of scheduling your work, etc., and you want to see all of the worksheets and all of the scheduling assets that I have created for myself, you are welcome to look at my website and have these for yourself. But that said, I hope some of these was helpful. I want to close this by really reiterating the fact that routines are designed specifically to work for your needs. Just because I play video games in the morning doesn't mean you have to. Just because I take casual Fridays on Fridays and I work 4 days a week doesn't mean you have to. Doesn't mean you're a failure because you cannot. And I want to be very clear about that. That said, when you begin to tackle routines for yourself as a freelance artist, I hope you take some of this advice with you. I hope you know that it is okay to tweak things. One of my favorite things to say is that there are no rules. There are literally no rules. All rules are made up. Even time itself is a social construct. It's something somebody made up sometime, and now we all function under a clock. And it is the same for routines. just because it works for somebody else, it doesn't mean that it has to work for you. And that also doesn't mean that you're not allowed to change the game. You can reinvent what routines mean to you. You can reinvent what self-care means to you. Just do what feels right for your specific needs, but always make sure you're looking after yourself. Always make sure you're looking ahead, and always make sure you have backup systems for yourself for the days where you are not able to work. Having ADHD is a struggle. It's literally constantly having to fight against the brain of a toddler that just wants to function in chaos and mess. So if you have this the same as me, be kind to yourself. Learn to be kind to yourself. There is no shame in struggling, and it is okay. Thank you so much for listening so far, and please let me know if you have any questions, or maybe my next video I can answer some questions. Maybe I can give a little tutorial about exactly how I tackle scheduling for myself, how that actually looks like in the calendar or something. I don't know. Let me know if anything was helpful, if you have any thoughts, if you have any constructive criticism, anything at all. I will be very interested to learn. Thank you all again for listening. I hope audio was a little better today, even though I have a construction site behind me, apparently outside. Oh my God. Anyways, thank you again, and I can't wait to see you guys next time. I'm still getting used to these YouTube things, so I'm not exactly sure when my next video is gonna be, but hopefully very soon. I'll see you guys. Thank you.